and with a lucky dip should be able to get that.
Good afternoon. I will be presenting now a case of a patient who was treated at our center recently. A 26-year-old male from Bangalore who was working as an administrative officer in an aviation company at the time came to us with a complaint of backache, which was present for the past 3 years. And it was predominantly a low backache and associated neck pain and infrequent mid-back pain. There was a history of associated limitation of movements of the back with stiffness, and he had noticed that the pain used to worsen after exercise, and there was a definite history of nocturnal pains interfering with normal sleep. What had brought the patient to the OPD at that point of time was a hip pain which had been present which had appeared over the previous week, and it was acute in onset and it was persistent. And there was a painful limitation of movements with stiffness, and he noticed that cold packs and rest used to reduce the pain in the hip joint, and this pain was constant throughout the day without any diurnal variation. There was no significant past history, and he also told us that his sister had been suffering from a chronic low backache. Coming to personal history, there was nothing very remarkable about this patient's personal history. He had been taking NSAIDs for quite a long time at his time of his first presentation, with no significant relief of symptoms. So on examination, general physical examination again was quite unremarkable, and so was the systemic examination. Coming to musculoskeletal system exam, there was tenderness over both the hip joints, and there was a restriction of internal and external rotation at the hip joint. On examination of the spine, the occiput to wall distance was 3.5 centimeters on the initial examination of cervical spine, and this test and its details have been touched upon already today in the morning session. And there was also a restriction of the range of movements at the cervical spine. At the thoracic spine, chest expansion was 3.5 centimeters. The Schober's test, which was detailed in the morning, again was abnormal or restricted, and the measurement was 2 centimeters. The patient on the finger floor distance test, that is when the patient attempts to bend down and touch the floor, was again found to be abnormal, where the patient was not able to reach down to the floor significantly, and there was gross restriction of movement. Again, lateral flexion of the spine was restricted, and a Faber's test was positive. Now, this is both a test, as you can see, when we try it, it's a maneuver which tries to elicit pain over the sacroiliac joints, as well to a certain extent, it elicits pain in the hip joints as well. It actually helps us to target the actual source of pain, that is, localize it to the sacroiliac joint. So at baseline, these were the investigation reports obtained. We can see that the inflammatory markers here, namely the ESR and CRP, are significantly elevated, but the rest of it seems to be more or less within normal limits. On radiological investigation, the X-ray of pelvis of the patient revealed a grade 4 sacroiliitis, which is quite advanced. And an MRI which the patient had obtained shortly before coming to us showed a symmetric fusion of the bilateral sacroiliac joint with mild subarticular marrow edema in the posterior inferior aspect of the right S1 sacroiliac joints, with reduction in joint space in both bilateral L4, L5 facet joints, and these features were commented by the radiologist to be in favor of a diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis. Virology screen was negative, and so was the VDRL, and the HLA-B27 test was found to be positive. So based on all these findings, a diagnosis of ankylosing spondylitis was reached, and promptly treatment was commenced for this patient, and the treatment recommended was sulfasalazine 1000 milligram twice a day with NSAIDs, and the patient was able to tolerate this treatment well. Physiotherapy was initiated, And the BASDAI score, which again was alluded to in the morning, at initial presentation was 6.9. So as a routine review, he was called back after 6 weeks, and the patient's symptom had reduced slightly since his first visit. And he also reported that he had a marginal increase in the movements of the back since commencing the treatment. So these were the investigations which were obtained at the review. And here we can see that the ESR and the CRP have declined without any evidence of any significant side effects of the drug. So we can see here that the BASDAI too has declined, and so have the inflammatory markers. So I would just like to put it to the House what they would suggest that we do at this point of time.
I couldn't listen fully.
He was on, he had been using diclofenac for quite some time. We had asked him to switch over to celecoxib because he had not been tolerating nimesulide.
Yeah.
And he had tried multiple NSAIDs, and we also suspected that he might be having hypersensitivity to certain other drugs as well, but he is quite certain that he had not tried celecoxib until that point of time. He had tried nabumetone, he had tried naproxen.
He is on what dose of salazopyrin?
1000 mg BDs.
2 grams.
Yes.
Okay. So this case is a fairly advanced case of ankylosing spondylitis. The whatever improvement what we are getting in this patient is partly attributed to the persistent use of NSAIDs after coming to our center. Maybe he was using more or less on a source basis before coming to here. And second thing is the sulfasalazine what we have prescribed to him. Depending on this whether salazopyrin will act on his axial symptoms, that is the cause of his improvement in BASDAI, we don't know exactly, but I would like to add a biological agent upfront in this patient if the patient is affording. If the patient is not affording, then continue the painkillers, extensive exercise, and increase the dose of salazopyrin at least to 3 grams.
Probably I will also increase the sulfasalazine to 3 grams, hoping that sulfasalazine is effective in axial symptoms of ankylosing spondylitis. It's a controversial area. The peripheral arthritis component of ankylosing spondylitis responds reasonably well to sulfasalazine. There is a controversy whether axial. Most of the Western studies have concluded that it doesn't. But if you ask the experience of Indian senior rheumatologists who are senior to us, who are using same drugs for longer than us, they feel that sulfasalazine does work. And so we also believe that it does help in some patients. So we increase it to 3 grams. And ideally, only biologicals would work on a much reliable basis in ankylosing spondylitis. The choice is either to continue non-steroidal on a long-term basis, if he is a young patient, if he can tolerate NSAID, that is an option, or to consider biologicals upfront.
Yeah, I mean, see, this is where we little differ from the recommendations and what happens. Actually, in our center and whenever I manage, normally we go by adding methotrexate in addition to increasing the sulfasalazine, or maintaining sulfasalazine and methotrexate. See, there are anecdotal and sort of a questionable benefit from that, but it does benefit in quite a good number of patients. And we would like, in this kind of scenarios, to add methotrexate before thinking of or talking about the biologics, because cost factor is the major issue which concerns us. And even now, I think recommendation from IRA insists to try with sulfasalazine before thinking or switching over to a possible biologics. Try full dose of sulfasalazine, and if required a methotrexate, and then go ahead to use biologics. And that's the current recommendation. If you go to the Western recommendation, if you see European or the other American recommendation, the very first beginning, in the very first day when the patient entered with the BASDAI of that much, with an NSAID being used earlier and not showing response, the first drug given is going to be the biologics. This is the scenario change which is there based on the country's recommendation, scenarios, including the economical as well as the available data. So probably, I mean, we need to seriously work on these issues. Probably, I think, hopefully, as a rheumatologist, we need to sit and do something to give some more better scope on these areas. The first choice, given the scenario, I would like sulfasalazine, and if necessary, if the disease is too severe, add along with methotrexate in the very beginning. If there is no improvement, like what we did in the previous rheumatoid patients, we would like to go on escalating the dose of both sulfasalazine and methotrexate till we get the highest permissible dose of both the drugs, and still we fail. If we fail, at that time, we manage it as if the patient is not likely to respond to these group of drugs and go to the biologics. Analgesics in angst-pond is preferably to continue as long as patient tolerates and wants it. So what we meant is if the patient continue to have symptoms, pain, stiffness, and the other manifestations, it's best to continue NSAIDs. And after using the disease-modifying drug, both sulfasalazine and methotrexate, in some set of patients, they will be pain-free. There, first you can withdraw NSAIDs, and then, if required, you can withdraw the other drugs. Because the preferred drug to withdraw is NSAID, because the amount of adverse reaction, as we say, comparing to NSAID versus sulfasalazine versus methotrexate, NSAIDs rank high. So you withdraw NSAIDs as soon as patient become symptomatically better and can manage his day-to-day life without NSAIDs.
One practical point regarding NSAIDs is, sometimes patient will not respond to 1 or 2 or 3 classes of NSAIDs also. So just go on changing the NSAIDs. Because some patients respond extremely well with 90 milligrams of etorecoxib, they will say 36 relief. Some patients simply don't respond at all. So you go to indomethacin. Or some people respond only to diclofenac. Whatever you give, they will not respond. So depends on patient to patient actually. So it is worthwhile trying 2 or at least 3 classes of NSAIDs before telling that it is refractory to NSAIDs.
And another caution is don't try combination of NSAIDs. Please never try combination of any NSAIDs. Don't use diclofenac, nimesulide, and those kind of combinations. They are not permitted, nor it is wiser. So either you have to, only NSAID which can be combined is paracetamol with any of the NSAIDs. You can add paracetamol plus another NSAIDs. No such combination like itrocoxib and diclofenac, morning diclofenac, evening itrocoxib. Those kind of combinations are not permitted. It's not allowed. And you need to be on a single NSAID. As he said, switch the class. I mean, in a sense, if the patient is not responding to diclofenac, don't change to hyphenac, because they are same single group of NSAIDs. So change from one type of compound to another type of compounds. And we are still wondering why there is a difference between patient to patient in responding to NSAIDs. We are still unable to estimate or figure out why this difference is there, but this difference is definitely there. There is no gradation in the NSAIDs. In a sense, it's not that the diclofenac is a very high potent drug compared to nimesulides. Surprisingly, you may see a patient who are not doing good with 100 milligram 2 times of diclofenac may respond to 100 milligram of nimesulide. Just nimesulide, he says, thank you very much, sir, the change was very good. The previous doc might have tried with 100 milligram of diclofenac twice daily, so a change of nimesulide, he may come back to say that thanks, but there may other way around also can happen.
How about muscle relaxant? Any role of muscle relaxant?
There is no role for muscle relaxant when it comes to the ankylosing spondylitis and those diseases. There are role of muscle relaxant in the diseases with muscle spasms like fibromyalgia or muscular spasm because of any cramps, etc. But when it comes to ankylosing spondylitis, there is no role for muscle relaxant. The stiffness, what we talk about in the muscle or including the perijoint area, is because of inflammation. It's only the anti-inflammation which works to help the muscle cramps or spasms.
So moving ahead, what we decided to do was to continue the treatment with sulfasalazine and the NSAIDs, and additionally methotrexate was commenced at a dose of 10 milligram per week with concomitant folic acid supplementation. Then again the patient was reviewed after further 6 months, which is now 3 months from the baseline visit. And at that point of time, the patient's symptoms of back pain and stiffness were unchanged since the previous visit, and he had no further significant improvement in the movements of the back. These were the investigation reports obtained at the time. We can see that again the inflammatory markers of ESR and CRP are quite high, and the BASDAI score is not significantly very different from his previous visit 6 weeks earlier, and in fact the inflammation seems to have got worse. So again I would put the question as to what is the correct course of action at this point.
Now this is a real tough decision actually. Patient has finances. Again, if the patient has finances, again there are two options. How much finance does he really have? And even if he has finances, he is willing to spend the money for his disease or not. So just simply having finances is not enough. If the patient says, no, I don't have enough finances even for at least a short course of biological agent, I would now try him to experiment with pamidronate actually. So some people do get some benefit with monthly infusions of bisphosphonate. There is no clear-cut guideline for that, but because we don't have any option, we just can't say that, okay, you go on taking painkillers and you suffer. You will give them an option. If it works, if it doesn't work, that only once he comes back we will know. So give him a pamidronate with a short course of pulse methylprednisolone. That is my choice actually. And if still he is not responding, I will counsel him for at least a short course of biological agent. I will obviously say that there is no short course, nothing like short course of biological agent, but if his functional class is going down and down, then that is the only option.
No, I mean, in this patient, we have a little room to increase the methotrexate. I think he was in 10 mg. I think we can escalate it up to 25 mg and see if the response improves upon. Probably if it happens, we can save him some money. So if it doesn't, then we are back into the same square.
And so it was decided to escalate the dosage of methotrexate to 20 milligram per week, keeping the sulfasalazine and NSAIDs firmly in place. And the patient was reviewed after another 6 weeks, by which time it was already 4.5 months from the presentation. And at that point of time, the patient's symptoms of back pain and stiffness had reduced since his previous visit, and he reported a further improvement in the movements of the back and the hip joints. And these were the investigation reports at the time. No significant evidence of any drug-related side effects, and we can note a decline in the inflammatory markers. And his BASDAI score too had declined to 3.6 at that point of time, and generally the patient seemed to be doing well. So again, what would be the further course of action here?
Well, I mean, I think what we do is to bring down his NSAIDs and encourage him to get out of the NSAIDs and continue with sulfasalazine and methotrexate at the same dose, watching for any adverse reaction or flare. I think that would be the best choice because we have achieved the target of symptom being free and a BASDAI to minimum possible score. Any?
So as such, the treatment was continued with sulfasalazine as well as a methotrexate dose which was kept constant at 20 milligrams per week. The patient was asked to come for a further review, and he did come back after 6 weeks, at which point of time it was already 6 months since the treatment had started. And at this point of time, he reported that he had an increase in the pain and a stiffness in the back, and which was reported to be quite severe, as well as a sharp pain in his hip joints. And it was ensured that he had been very compliant with the medication, and there had been no abnormal intercurrent events or intake of any other medication alternative therapies, etc., during this interval of 6 weeks. And these were the reports which were delivered to us by the lab. His ESR was now 80 millimeters, and CRP had risen to 36, and his BASDAI score once again climbed to 7.1. So we can see here that now he has quite overwhelming evidence of active and ongoing inflammation. So again, this was a decision that was finally taken at that point of time. So I would again put it to the House whether they consider the decision taken to be appropriate.
I mean, see, technically in this patient this is the best choice, because looking at the way the disease is fluctuating, it's most often it is had a small tilt of bending down, but subsequently it's flaring back. And the only small room we have is to increase the methotrexate to another 25 milligram and try to see whether it responds, and changing the methotrexate from oral to subcutaneous and try out whether it works. But looking at the overall behavior, the biologic behavior of the disease, it do not seems to be one which is likely to respond to these two group of drugs. So at this point of time, the best right option is to go for biologics. But in the event of other consideration, the only way is to work with either adding pulses of steroids, trying to work with pamindronate, trying to work with other alternative options which we have, but waiting for some time to put him on to the biologics. Because I can tell you, when it comes to the management of ankylosing spondylitis as well as some of these spondyloarthropathies, the response to biologics, especially anti-TNF, is dramatic. The response you get out of 100 patients, it's almost 95% of the patients improve within 24 to 48 hours after the infusion of anti-TNF antibodies. But unfortunately, the dramatic response costs a lot. And that's one thing which inhibits or prohibits us from using it. Even the long-term outcome of these biologics, with reference to these angst has been proved very well. But there are a lot of issues and questions that we have to seriously work in this. See, for example, if the patient gets this disease at the age of 20 or 18 years, and he has a hip disease, and the worsening of the disease or the handicap the likely this patient is going to develop is usually 10 to 15 years from the point of the disease. So at the age of 10 or 15, if he gets an angst, he deteriorates or becomes what we call an handicap by the age of 30 to 35 years. All his effort of education, both from parents and himself, when he is going to ripe it out, probably he becomes handicapped or disabled. He is a patient who need to be personalized and need to be an aggressive treatment with an anti-TNF or biologics. We need to organize something to this group of patients and help them out. On the contrary, let's imagine a scenario where a patient gets for the first time at the age of 35-40 an early sacroiliitis, minimal disease. The deformities in ankylosing spondylitis, vis-a-vis compared to the rheumatoid arthritis, takes 10 to 20 years for it to develop. It's not like rheumatoid, where if you don't treat 60% of the rheumatoid, the disease makes them handicapped by the end of 2 to 3 years. Let there be whatever the age, 35 or 45 or 25, plus 2 years he is down on the bed. But when it comes to the drugs, the diseases like angst, a good dose of NSAIDs, good dose of exercise, good physical activity can keep him in a good shape for next 10 to 15 years. At the age of 35, if financial is a restraint, probably you can defer and try to use with these group of drugs, toggle between these drugs, because whatever is likely to happen is at the age of 50, 55, another 10 more years for him to retire. Or probably he can accelerate the way he would like to ripe out of whatever he has done or is going to likely to do if he is not able to manage it. And these are the issues where you can personalize, take a call on the expected projection to what you can see currently. I mean, this is a sort of issues which we need to seriously rework with each individual patient and take a call. This is how a surgical replacement of knee has to be taken up. This is how a disease modifying drug has to be taken care. And I do insist, even in diabetes, a very tight control at the age of 70 of a first-time diabetic is not required. You need to look into a very tight diabetic control if a person develops diabetes at the age of 35, because his life expectancy from 35 is another 35. A person who develops a diabetes for the first time at the age of 70, his life expectancy is anytime from 1 year to another 30 years. And it's more likely 1 year rather than 30 years. So there is no point in pushing him off to such a tight control where he repeatedly goes for a hypoglycemia. Because the complications of microvascular angiopathy and all what you are worried is after 15 years of diabetic, and which is less likely he may see, he may not see. So allow him to enjoy the sweets and foods which he would love for the next 15 years where he is alive, there, because your interference with the diet may be a reduction in his quality of life rather than a quality of life which you may not expect him to live with. So the decision making should be highly personalized. You need to give a thought before you prescribe that what am I going to do for him now and long run. That's where a chronic disease management differs from an acute disease management. In acute disease management, you have no thought process left. Tuberculosis, 4-drug antitubercular, no choice, or DART as specified by the government. If it is a meningitis, no choice left, choose the antibiotic as specified by the culture sensitivity or whatever the patient is not hypersensitive. But when it comes to a point of a chronic disease, there is a lot of art which is required in addition to the science and thought processes. So that's what we need to work out with. For a period of time, we should get into those areas. Thank you very much. Anything?
I would like to thank the chairpersons and the audience as we come to the end of the session. Thank you.
We are coming